Richard Fuller.
Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak to new clause 39, standing in my name and also the names of the Chair of the Procedure Committee, the Chair of the International Development Select Committee, and the Chair of the Business Select Committee. For a variety of reasons, none of my colleagues, the chairs, could be with us today, and I fear that I am a poor substitute for them in making the points, but I will seek to... I will seek... No, genuinely. With great modesty, I shall.
Can I just reassure my honourable friend that by the very fact that he is moving this, he is more than a substitute, he is on the side of the rights.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and may I say one other aspect is it did give me the opportunity to have a fresh look at an area of legislation that I haven't been as deeply involved as my right honourable friend has been, and therefore perhaps raise some concerns that the Minister may not get from other quarters that perhaps have a very keen focus on that piece of legislation on modern-day slavery. I also rise in support of Amendment 3 in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland. I will be pleased to hear him later express his support for my new clause, as I would hope also the SNP shall do. And I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, the opposition spokesman, the Honourable Member for Halifax, for her indication of support. And the reason I say that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that my new clause has not been selected for separate division, and therefore it's important from this House that we send a clear and unequivocal cross-party message to the other House for their deliberations, where perhaps this issue can be looked at anew. I will give way.
I'm sure that the House will be on tenterhooks to know, so I can put it out its misery and tell the honourable member that I'm more than happy to support his influence.
Gasp.
I'm very pleased to be off tenterhooks, although I never actually know what tenterhooks are, but they don't sound very comfortable. So, new clause 39, Madam Speaker, provides the government with an opportunity to achieve its objectives, but I believe on a considerably more secure legal footing than perhaps its current proposals permit. New clause 39 has been informed by the concerns raised by the independent anti-slavery Commissioner Dame Sarah Thornton. Clause 62, as currently in place, seeks to disqualify potential victims of trafficking from the protections afforded under the National Referral Mechanism. These protections are important, not just as a manifestation of the mercy of our country towards those whose lives have been made most wretched by the exploitations of others, but also to enable more effective prosecution of the perpetrators of such trafficking. Consideration of exclusion from these protections therefore requires careful assessment of the consequences for both of these factors, and moreover should be considered in the context, as my right honourable friend for Chingford has mentioned, of our country's leading position in international law on human trafficking. That's a position we should not give up at all lightly. My first concern with clause 62 as proposed is to ask, where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that access to the National Referral Mechanism is being abused? And where is the evidence from the government of the impact of their proposal? My second concern is it doesn't appear to address the vexatious or unwarranted claims regarding access to the National Referral Mechanism. This was a point made again by my honourable friend, the member for Chingford, and when he was proposing his new clause. But this new clause doesn't do that either. This is not what the government's provides. The government's clause doesn't do this either. This is trying to do, using the wrong piece of legislation to do what they hope is the right thing, but I think many of us fear it will make the situation worse rather than the better. So in the absence of evidence and the absence of, certainly on the face of it, a real reason why this is the logical measure to take, I do find myself a bit perplexed why the clause is being proposed in this bill in this particular way. My concern is also that in clause 3b and 3f of clause 62, if I've got that correct, Madam Deputy Speaker, it provides a very low bar for disqualification based on criminal sentencing. Now, for those not familiar with modern-day slavery, such as myself, it may sound odd that there is a public interest in supporting people who have committed crimes, either here or more likely overseas, that may carry a 12-month sentence. That's the bar. It's a 12-month sentence bar. But that public interest is the same public interest as we have with criminal gangs, drug gangs, in trying to reach those who are the main perpetrators of of those county lines, or with serious fraud, where we're looking at people who are the ultimate perpetrators of those sorts of endeavours. So the public interest is to enable sufficient evidence to be collated to bring successful prosecutions of the coordinators of the crime. And that's where this clause, I fear, falls short with those particular two subclauses 3b and 3f. And I would ask the Minister, perhaps because I can see in the other subparts of this clause very good reasons why it makes sense. But in 3b and 3f, it clearly is very different from the other positions. And I'd be very interested to understand what the logic is of the Minister when she rises to respond. The point I'm going to build on is that the most British victims, and we have to remember that there are, although it's an immigration clause, it actually is going to apply in large part to people who are here and are British citizens as well, because it refers to the national referral mechanism. Most British victims will fall foul of this clause. Despite being immigration, this, as I say, will impact British victims who currently make up the majority, a large portion of victims. And data suggests that the vast majority of British victims would fail under the bill's disqualifying remit, as the majority of cases involving British victims involve criminal exploitation, and even those that fall under labour or sexual exploitation often participate in criminal activities as part of their exploitation, and so may end up being quote-unquote unworthy under the present bill of support. And I feel that's not particularly what we're trying to do, and again, not what should be in a bill on immigration. Another kind of concern that has been raised with me, Madam Deputy, is that there are currently quite significant difficulties with bringing forward prosecutions for modern slavery. As speakers have previously mentioned, with approximately 10,000 potential victims of modern slavery identified in the UK last year and only 238 convictions, it is clear that the process is at risk of being overloaded. So I'd have to ask my honourable friend, the Minister, how does it help for there to be new additional legal requirements for an investigation of the criminal history for each and every one of those potential victims who are seeking access to the national referral mechanism? How on earth is that going to help? And haven't we been here before, more than a decade ago? I don't like to refer back to the bad old days of Labour. They're so far in the bad, but they were bad old days when it comes to immigration. But what a complete mess they made of it, and ended up with situations where processing wasn't taking place, and the lives of many of my former constituents in Bedford, and I think many honourable members here, were rather ruined by the process of the Home Office, and those processes are still not where they need to be. And yet, with this new provision regarding access to the national referral mechanism, the Home Office is at it again, making it more complicated, more difficult, and ultimately, I fear, Minister, making a rod for your own back. So what would be the effect of new clause 39? The new clause would remove children from the scope of the clause, and I think for many speakers have mentioned that as an important aspect. We don't want children to fall foul of other rules and regulations, certainly when it comes to issues to do with their criminal records or otherwise. And I'd be asked my Minister if he would or she would address that directly in their summing up. The new clause preserves the government's power to remove individuals from the UK who pose an immediate, genuine, present and serious threat to public order. The provision here is therefore, we understand you want to make these changes, and there may be a good reason, but let's set the bar higher, more pertinent, so that you don't block up the whole system and you don't unduly use immigration laws on an aspect when it comes to modern slavery. That seems to be a very sensible change to make. It changes the wording so that a person claimed to be trafficked improperly will be as opposed to bad faith. And I would say that makes it more in line with the Trafficking Convention. And when a government is seeking to conflate, perhaps a little bit too much, Madam Deputy Speaker, modern slavery legislation, effective modern slavery legislation, with immigration law, it is important that we refer to the founding principles of that first set of legislation. Let's not just go wishy-washy on it and just say we can make it up as we go along. Let's not just port in one schedule from one particular bill and say it works fine in this bill. That seems sloppy to me, and it seems much better to more firmly and resolutely place it in international conventions and other aspects of international law. The new clause will ensure that the most vulnerable victims of slavery, including children, are able to come forward without fear of punishment themselves, to be identified, access safeguarding and support, and have the opportunity to engage and support the criminal justice processes. And this was the point that my right honourable friend, the former Prime Minister and member from Maidenhead, made earlier in the debate. I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that coming at this anew, I fear that the government has tried, as I say, too closely to conflate effective legislation on human trafficking with legislation on immigration. New Clause 39 seeks to help the government by securing its objectives more solidly in the law on modern slavery, rather than on the more perilous aspects it is currently pursuing on immigration law. It seeks to avoid some of the unfair excesses, particularly regarding children, which I think will cause upset to many, and ultimately to seek to be more effective in the prosecution of its immigration aims by avoiding the Home Office again, building up huge backlogs and trying to chase their tails on pieces of information which ultimately have no due regard in our laws at all.
Yeah.